You walk into rooms and feel like people barely notice you're there, while others seem to effortlessly draw people in with their magnetic presence. Every social interaction feels like an uphill battle where you're working twice as hard to connect. Yet somehow you remain on the periphery while others become the center of attention without even trying. I am Dale Carnegie, and I spent my entire life studying what makes people genuinely likable and influential. Through my research and personal transformation from a shy farm boy to someone who taught millions how to win friends and influence people, I discovered the exact principles that separate those who struggle socially from those who naturally attract others. What I'm about to share with you will transform how people respond to you, giving you the social magnetism to become the kind of person others genuinely want to be around. The same principles that helped me overcome my own social struggles and teach countless others to do the same can work for anyone willing to apply them. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for social transformation. Let me take you back to a wooden farmhouse in Missouri, where I learned my first painful lesson about what it means to be unlikable. I was born into poverty on a farm near Maryville, the second son of parents who struggled to put food on our table. My father, James Carnegie, worked from dawn to dusk just to keep our family afloat, and my mother, Amanda, did everything she could to hold our world together. But it wasn't the poverty that shaped me most, it was the crushing realization that I was invisible to other people. In school, I watched as other children naturally gravitated toward certain classmates, drawn like magnets to their easy laughter and confident presence. They seemed to possess some mysterious quality that I utterly lacked. When teachers asked questions, hands shot up eagerly around me, but I sat frozen, terrified that speaking would only reveal how inadequate I truly was. I remember standing in the corner during recess while other children played together, feeling like I was separated from them by an invisible wall. They would laugh and joke, completely unaware of my existence just a few feet away. The painful truth was that I had nothing interesting to say, no natural charm to offer, and no idea how to bridge the gap between my isolated world and theirs. The turning point came during a particularly humiliating moment in my sophomore year. Our teacher asked for volunteers to recite a poem in front of the class. As usual, my heart pounded with terror at the thought of standing before my peers, but something inside me snapped that I was tired of being invisible, tired of living in the shadows while others basked in social warmth. I raised my trembling hand when I stood up to recite. My voice cracked on the very first line. Snickers rippled through the classroom. My face burned with embarrassment, but I forced myself to continue. By the end of the poem, something miraculous had happened. The snickering had stopped, and a few classmates were actually listening. It wasn't applause, but it wasn't mockery either. For the first time in my life, I had commanded attention. However briefly, that night I built a makeshift wooden podium in my father's barn. Standing on those rough boards, speaking to an audience of hay bales and farm animals, I made a promise to myself that would change everything. I decided that if likability was a skill, and it had to be, because some people clearly possessed it while others didn't, then it could be learned, practiced, and mastered. This was the beginning of my obsession with understanding what makes people genuinely attractive to others. I didn't yet know that this moment of humiliation and determination would eventually lead me to teach millions of people the secrets of human relations. All I knew was that I refused to remain invisible for the rest of my life. Asterisk, asterisk, after that transformative moment in my father's barn, I became a student of human behavior in ways that consumed my every waking hour. I carried with me a small leather-bound notebook, worn smooth from constant handling, where I recorded every observation about what made some people magnetic, while others remained invisible. I started my research in the most unlikely of places. The general store in Maryville, where farmers gathered to discuss crops and weather. I would position myself near the Cracker Barrel, pretending to examine merchandise while actually studying the social dynamics unfolding before me. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about human nature. There was old Mr. Henderson, who commanded attention the moment he walked through the door. Men would interrupt their conversations to greet him, and within minutes, a small crowd would form around his weathered frame. At first, I assumed it was because he owned the largest farm in the county, but I soon realized something far more profound was happening. Mr. Henderson had mastered the art of making every person feel like the most important individual in the room. When young Tommy Miller mentioned his sick cow, Henderson didn't just nod politely, he asked detailed questions about the symptoms, shared a similar experience from his own farm, and offered genuine concern. When Mrs. Patterson worried about her son's upcoming marriage, Henderson listened with the intensity of a man hearing life or death intelligence. I filled page after page with observations like these. I noticed that the most likable people shared certain unmistakable patterns. They remembered personal details from previous conversations. They asked follow-up questions that showed they had been truly listening. They celebrated others' successes without a hint of jealousy and offered comfort during difficult times without trying to fix everything. But perhaps most importantly, I discovered that these naturally likable people had learnt to see the world through other people's eyes. When Farmer Johnson complained about the drought, Henderson didn't immediately launch into his own weather woes. He focused entirely on Johnson's concerns, asking about specific crops and offering practical suggestions. The revelation that changed my entire approach to human relations came during a church social when I witnessed something extraordinary. A traveling salesman named Williams had somehow managed to make himself the center of attention, but not in the way you might expect. He wasn't telling jokes or showing off. Instead, he was moving from person to person, drawing out their stories and making each individual feel fascinating. I watched him spend 10 minutes with elderly Mrs. Crane, listening with rapt attention. As she described her prize-winning preserves, he asked her about her secret ingredients, her grandmother's techniques, and the story behind her blue ribbon victory at the county fair. By the end of their conversation, Mrs. Crane was glowing with pride, and Williams had gained not just her admiration, but the respect of everyone who witnessed their exchange. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "The secret of influencing people lies not in talking about yourself, but in helping others talk about themselves." This single insight would become the foundation of everything I would later teach about winning friends and influencing people. I realized that most people spend their days desperately wanting to feel important, valued, and heard. The person who could genuinely provide that feeling would become irresistibly attractive to others. This wasn't manipulation. It was recognizing and fulfilling the deepest human need for significance and connection. Asterisk, asterisk. Armed with my growing understanding of human nature, I knew I needed to test these principles in the real world. After graduating from college, I moved to New York City with nothing but a suitcase and a burning desire to prove that an awkward farm boy could learn to connect with people. My first real laboratory became the Young Men's Christian Association, where I convinced them to let me teach public speaking classes. I still remember the handwritten roster from my first class: 12 nervous individuals who, like me, believed they could overcome their social limitations through systematic practice and proven principles. What happened in those early classes taught me something crucial. Confidence doesn't magically appear, it grows from competence. You can't fake genuine interest in others, but you can develop it through deliberate practice. You can't manufacture authentic enthusiasm, but you can cultivate it by focusing on what genuinely matters to other people. My teaching method evolved through trial and error, success and failure. I discovered that simply telling people to be more confident was useless. Instead, I had to break down the complex art of human relations into specific, actionable techniques that anyone could learn and apply. I developed what I called the genuine interest principle after watching my students struggle with networking events. Those who tried to impress others by talking about themselves inevitably failed. But when I taught them to become genuinely curious about other people's experiences, dreams, and challenges, magic happened. Conversations flowed naturally, connections formed effortlessly, and even the shyest students began attracting others. The breakthrough came when I realized that most people approach social situations with the wrong question. They ask, "How can I get these people to like me?" Instead, they should ask, "How can I find something genuinely interesting about each person I meet?" This shift in focus transforms everything because it takes the pressure off you and puts your attention where it belongs, on the other person. I began teaching my students specific techniques for developing authentic interest. Before attending any social gathering, they would research attendees when possible, preparing thoughtful questions about their work, interests, or recent achievements. During conversations, they learned to listen not just for information, but for emotions, what excited people, what concerned them, what they were proud of. One of my early students, Robert, had been struggling in his sales career because potential clients found him pushy and self-centered. I taught him to spend the first part of every meeting learning about the client's business challenges, personal interests, and long-term goals. Within 3 months, his sales had doubled, not because he became a better salesman, but because he became genuinely interested in helping his clients solve their problems. The more I taught these principles, the more I understood that likability isn't about charisma or natural charm. It's about making a fundamental decision to care more about others than about yourself. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or losing your own identity. It means recognizing that in a world full of people desperately trying to prove their own importance, the person who helps others feel important becomes invaluable. I developed exercises for my students to practice these skills daily. They would commit to asking 3 genuine questions in every conversation, to remembering 1 personal detail about each person they met, and to expressing sincere appreciation for others' accomplishments. These weren't just communication techniques, they were character-building exercises that gradually transformed how my students saw and treated other people. What surprised me most was how these changes affected my students' own happiness. When you spend your time genuinely focused on making others feel valued and understood, you stop obsessing about your own social performance. The anxiety that comes from self-consciousness disappears when your attention is fully engaged with another person's experiences and emotions. After years of teaching and observing thousands of students, I distilled everything I had learned into 6 fundamental principles. I kept these rules written on a small card that I carried everywhere, referring to them so often that the edges became worn smooth. These weren't abstract theories. They were practical tools that had been tested in real-world situations by ordinary people who achieved extraordinary results in their relationships. The first principle became the foundation for all the others. Become genuinely interested in other people. This sounds simple, but most people get it backwards. They try to become interesting to others instead of becoming interested in others. I learned this distinction from watching a woman named Sarah at a dinner party who captivated everyone around her. She wasn't the most beautiful, successful, or entertaining person there, but she possessed an almost magnetic quality that drew people to her. I studied her technique carefully. Sarah asked thoughtful questions and listened to the answers with complete attention. When someone mentioned their hobby, she wanted to know how they got started and what they loved most about it. When a man talked about his work challenges, she explored his feelings about the situation rather than immediately offering solutions. By the end of the evening, everyone felt they had made a genuine connection with Sarah, though she had revealed very little about herself. The second principle emerged from my observation of the most successful people I met. Smile, but not just any smile, genuine smile that comes from truly feeling pleased to see someone. I discovered that a fake smile actually repels people because it signals insincerity. A real smile, however, creates an immediate emotional connection that transcends words. I taught my students to practice what I called inner smiling, finding something genuinely positive about each person they met before the smile reached their face. This might be appreciation for someone's dedication to their work, admiration for their perseverance through challenges, or simple gratitude for their willingness to share their time. When the smile comes from a place of authentic, positive feeling, it becomes irresistible. The third principle revolutionized how my students approached introductions and ongoing relationships. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. I learned this from my own painful experience of being forgotten and overlooked. When someone remembers your name, they're telling you that you matter enough to occupy space in their memory. Developed specific techniques for mastering names. Upon meeting someone, I would repeat their name immediately in conversation. "It's wonderful to meet you, Patricia." I would create mental associations between their name and something distinctive about them. Most importantly, I would use their name naturally throughout our conversation, not as a forced technique, but as a sign of respect and attention. The fourth principle challenged everything most people believe about conversation. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. I discovered that people are infinitely more interested in their own problems and achievements than in yours. The person who learns to draw others out, to help them articulate their thoughts and feelings, becomes incredibly valuable in their eyes. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing your own voice. It means asking the kinds of questions that help people think more clearly about their own experiences. Instead of waiting for your turn to speak, you become genuinely curious about their perspective, their challenges, and their dreams. The fifth principle taught my students how to build instant rapport, talk in terms of the other person's interests. I learned this from watching a master networker who could connect with anyone from farmers to philosophers. He had developed the ability to find genuine connections between his own experiences and whatever passionate interest the other person possessed. The final principle tied everything together. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. This is the golden key that unlocks every relationship. People can sense insincerity from miles away, but when you genuinely appreciate something about them and express it thoughtfully, you give them one of the most precious gifts possible, the feeling that they matter. These 6 principles aren't manipulation tactics, they're ways of becoming the kind of person others naturally want to be around. When you master them, you stop worrying about whether people like you because you're too busy helping them feel liked, understood, and valued. Asterisk, of all the principles I taught, genuine interest proved to be both the most powerful and the most misunderstood. I watched countless students try to fake interest in others, only to discover that people can detect insincerity with remarkable accuracy. The difference between manufactured curiosity and authentic interest is like the difference between fool's gold and the real thing, similar in appearance, but completely different in value. I learnt this lesson through my own embarrassing failure. At a business luncheon early in my career, determined to network effectively, I approached a successful businessman and peppered him with questions about his work. But my mind was elsewhere, focused on what I would say next rather than on his answers. Within minutes, he politely excused himself, leaving me standing, alone with the realization that my interest had been nothing more than a poorly executed performance. The breakthrough came when I met a janitor named Frank who worked in the building where I taught my classes. Every evening, Frank would greet me with genuine warmth and ask about my day. What struck me wasn't just his friendliness, but his authentic curiosity about my teaching experiences. He remembered details from our previous conversations and asked thoughtful follow-up questions about my students' progress. Frank had no agenda, no networking goals, no business cards to exchange. He was simply a person who found other people genuinely fascinating. Watching him interact with everyone from executives to delivery drivers, I realized he possessed something far more valuable than any networking technique he had developed: the capacity to see something interesting in every person he encountered. This revelation led me to develop what I called the curiosity cultivation method. I began training myself to approach each person as if they were a book I had never read, full of unique experiences and perspectives I could learn from. Instead of thinking about what I could gain from the interaction, I focused on what I could discover about their world. The transformation was remarkable. When I genuinely wanted to understand someone's challenges at work, they opened up in ways that surprised both of us. When I became truly curious about their hobbies or interests, they shared their passion with infectious enthusiasm. The key was shifting from performative interest asking questions to seem engaged to authentic interest asking questions, because I genuinely wanted to know the answers. I discovered that genuine interest operates like a magnetic force. When someone senses that you truly care about their thoughts and experiences, they naturally gravitate toward you. This isn't because you're trying to charm them, but because you're offering them something rare and precious: your complete attention, an authentic curiosity about their life. The compound effect of genuine interest extends far beyond individual conversations. When you consistently show authentic curiosity about others, you develop a reputation as someone who truly listens and cares. People begin seeking you out, not because you're the most entertaining or successful person in the room, but because they feel valued and understood in your presence. This principle transformed not just my relationships, but my entire approach to life. Instead of walking into rooms wondering if people would find me interesting, I began wondering what interesting things I might discover about the people I would meet. This shift in focus eliminated social anxiety because my attention was no longer on my own performance, it was on the fascinating complexity of human experience surrounding me. Asterisk. I spent years studying the remarkable power of a genuine smile before I truly understood its transformative effect on human relationships. The difference between a real smile and a forced one became clear to me during a particularly difficult period in my teaching career, when I was struggling with personal setbacks and trying to maintain my enthusiasm in the classroom. My students could sense something was wrong, even though I was going through the motions of my usual animated teaching style. One particularly perceptive student approached me after class and said, "Mr. Carnegie, your mouth is smiling, but your eyes aren't." That observation changed everything I thought I knew about the psychology of positive expression. I began researching what scientists were discovering about facial expressions and their impact on both the person smiling and those who witnessed the smile. What I learned astounded me. A genuine smile, what researchers called a douche smile, after the French physician who first studied it, engages not just the mouth, but the muscles around the eyes, creating what people intuitively recognize as authentic happiness. But the most fascinating discovery was that smiling actually changes your internal emotional state. When you smile genuinely, your brain releases chemicals that make you feel happier, more confident, and more optimistic. This isn't just positive thinking, it's a physiological response that affects your entire demeanor and energy. I experimented with this principle in my own life, particularly during challenging interactions. When dealing with difficult people or stressful situations, I would find something genuinely positive about the moment, perhaps appreciation for the opportunity to practice patience, or gratitude for the chance to learn something new about human nature. From that authentic, positive feeling, a real smile would emerge naturally. The results were immediate and profound. People responded to my genuine smiles with warmth and openness that surprised me. Even in tense business negotiations, a moment of authentic positive expression could shift the entire dynamic of the conversation. I wasn't manipulating anyone. I was simply allowing my genuine positive feelings to show through my facial expression. I taught my students to develop what I called smile readiness, the ability to find something genuinely positive in any situation. This might be appreciation for someone's willingness to share their time, admiration for their expertise in their field, or simple gratitude for the opportunity to learn from their experience. When the smile comes from a place of authentic, positive emotion, it becomes a bridge that connects you with others at a deep, almost unconscious level. The social contagion of genuine smiles became one of my most powerful teaching tools. I discovered that when one person in a group began smiling authentically, others couldn't help but respond in kind. This created an upward spiral of positive emotion that made everyone more relaxed, more open, and more willing to connect. What surprised me most was how smiling affected my own confidence and social anxiety. When I focused on finding something genuinely positive about each person I met, and allowed that feeling to show through my expression, I stopped worrying about whether they would like me. I was too busy appreciating something about them to be self-conscious about my own performance. The healing power of a genuine smile extends far beyond social situations. I watched it transform customer service interactions, diffuse family conflicts, and create connections between strangers. A real smile tells people that you're genuinely pleased to see them, that their presence adds something positive to your day, and that you approach them with goodwill rather than judgment or indifference. The profound importance of remembering names became crystal clear to me through a painful personal experience that I'll never forget. I had been teaching at the YMCA for several months when I encountered a former student at a restaurant. He greeted me enthusiastically by name, recounted specific details from my classes, and expressed gratitude for how my teaching had helped his career. I smiled and responded warmly, but inside I was mortified, couldn't remember his name to save my life. The look of disappointment that flickered across his face when he realized I didn't remember him taught me one of the most important lessons of my career. To him, our teacher-student relationship had been meaningful and memorable. To me, he had been one face among hundreds. In that moment, I understood that forgetting someone's name isn't just a social oversight, a way of telling them they don't matter enough to occupy space in your memory. This revelation led me to develop what I called my name memory system, a set of techniques that transformed how I connected with people. The foundation of this system was understanding why names are so psychologically powerful. Your name represents your entire identities, the word that has been associated with you since birth, the sound that instantly captures your attention across a crowded room, the label that distinguishes you from every other person on earth. When someone remembers your name, especially after meeting you only briefly, they're sending a powerful message. You matter. You made enough of an impression that I took the trouble to commit your identity to memory. This simple act of remembrance creates an instant bond and demonstrates a level of respect that most people rarely experience. I began teaching my students specific techniques for mastering names. The first step was to truly hear the name when introduced. Most people are so focused on making a good impression that they don't actually listen to the other person's name. I taught them to repeat the name immediately. It's wonderful to meet you, Margaret. This repetition serves multiple purposes, ensures you heard correctly, helps cement the name in your memory, and shows immediate respect for the person's identity. The second technique involved creating mental associations. For Margaret, I might note that she had managerial bearing, linking her name with her apparent leadership qualities. For David, I might observe his deliberate way of speaking, connecting his name with his thoughtful communication style. These associations weren't always perfect, but they provided mental hooks that made names much easier to retrieve. The third element was using the name naturally throughout the conversation, not in an artificial, repetitive way that sounds like a sales technique, but as a genuine sign of respect and attention. Margaret, what you're saying about team leadership really resonates with me. David, I'd love to hear more about your approach to that challenge. What amazed me was how dramatically this affected my relationships with students, colleagues, and business associates. People began seeking me out at events, not because I was the most accomplished person in the room, but because I made them feel recognized and valued. A simple commitment to remembering names transformed me from someone who blended into the background into someone people genuinely wanted to connect with. I discovered that the magic of names extends beyond just remembering them correctly. Learning the stories behind people's names, whether they were named after a relative, what their name means, whether they prefer a nickname, creates additional opportunities for connection. These conversations reveal something personal and meaningful about their identity and family history. The compound effect of consistently remembering names cannot be overstated. Word spreads when someone makes the effort to remember and use people's names properly. You develop a reputation as someone who truly sees and values others as individuals, not just as faces in a crowd. This reputation becomes one of your most valuable assets in building lasting, meaningful relationships. I made a discovery that revolutionized my understanding of human communication. Most people are terrible listeners, and the person who learns to listen well becomes incredibly valuable to everyone they meet. This insight came to me during a conversation with one of the most successful businessmen I had ever encountered. A man named Charles, who seemed to have an almost magical ability to build relationships and influence outcomes. I spent an entire evening with Charles at a business dinner, expecting to learn his secrets through his brilliant conversation and persuasive speaking abilities. Instead, I watched him do something far more powerful. He listened with such complete attention that people opened up to him in ways that surprised even themselves. By the end of the evening, 3 different business leaders had shared confidential challenges with him and asked for his advice on major decisions. What struck me most was that Charles had revealed very little about himself during these conversations. He wasn't trying to impress anyone with his knowledge or achievements. Instead, he was completely focused on understanding the thoughts, feelings, and perspectives of the people he was talking with. This level of attention was so rare that people found it irresistible. I began studying the difference between hearing and listening, and what I discovered changed everything about how I approach conversations. Hearing is passive, it's simply receiving sound waves. Listening is active, it's engaging your full attention to understand not just the words being spoken, but the emotions, concerns, and deeper meanings behind those words. Most people think they're listening when they're actually just waiting for their turn to talk. They're so busy formulating their next response that they miss most of what the other person is trying to communicate. I taught my students to recognize this pattern in themselves and to consciously shift their focus from preparing their response to genuinely understanding the other person's message. The technique I developed involved what I called listening with your whole being. This meant making eye contact that showed genuine attention rather than polite interest. It meant asking follow-up questions that demonstrated you had truly heard and were curious to understand more deeply. It meant reflecting back what you heard to ensure accurate understanding So what you're saying is that the real challenge isn't the technical problem, but getting your team to embrace the change. I discovered that people have an almost desperate need to feel heard and understood. In a world where everyone is competing for attention, the person who provides their complete focus becomes incredibly precious. When you listen to someone with genuine attention, you're giving them one of the rarest gifts possible, the feeling that their thoughts and experiences matter. The transformative power of deep listening extends far beyond making people feel good. When you truly listen to someone, you gain access to information that others miss entirely. You understand their real concerns, their hidden motivations, their deepest fears and greatest aspirations. This understanding allows you to connect with them in ways that seem almost intuitive to outside observers. I taught my students specific techniques for becoming better listeners. They learned to put away distractions, to face the speaker directly, and to use their body language to show engagement. More importantly, they learned to quiet their own internal dialogue and focus completely on understanding the other person's world. The results were remarkable. Students who had struggled in sales suddenly began closing deals because they finally understood what their customers really needed. Managers who had battled employee conflicts found that people began coming to them for advice and guidance. Parents discovered that their children opened up to them in ways they had never experienced before. What surprised me most was how listening affected the listeners themselves. When you focus completely on understanding another person, you stop being self-conscious about your own performance. The anxiety that comes from worrying about what to say next disappears when your attention is fully engaged with what's being said to you. This creates a natural confidence that people find incredibly attractive. Asterisk. One of the most profound lessons I learned about human connection came from watching a master salesman named William, who could establish rapport with anyone within minutes of meeting them. What fascinated me wasn't his product knowledge or persuasive techniques. It was his uncanny ability to discover what truly mattered to each person and speak directly to those interests. I observed William interact with a farmer, a bank president, and a young mother all in the same afternoon. With the farmer, he discussed soil conditions and crop rotation with genuine interest. With the bank president, he explored economic trends and investment strategies. With the young mother, he talked about childhood development and family activities. In each case, William seemed to genuinely care about these topics, and the conversations flowed naturally. When I asked William about his approach, he shared something that became central to my teaching. Dale, everyone you meet is an expert in something that matters deeply to them. My job isn't to impress them with what I know, it's to discover what they know and show genuine appreciation for their expertise. This insight revolutionized how I approached every relationship, both personal and professional. Instead of trying to steer conversations toward my own interests and experiences, I began exploring what excited, concerned, or passionate the other person. I developed what I called my interest compass, mental tool for discovering what truly mattered to the people I met. The process began with careful observation. Before even speaking with someone, I would look for clues about their interests. Did they have family photos on their desk? Were they wearing a pin or badge that indicated membership in an organization? Did their office or workspace reveal hobbies or passions? These visual cues provided starting points for meaningful conversations. During our interactions, I learned to listen not just for information, but for energy. People's voices change when they talk about something they truly care about. Their pace quickens, their posture straightens, and their entire demeanor becomes more animated. When I detected this shift, I knew I had found something important to them, and I would explore it further with genuine curiosity. I discovered that everyone has what I called their passion topics, subjects that could keep them talking for hours if they found a willing listener. For some people, it was their children's accomplishments. For others, it was their hobby, their work challenges, their travel experiences, or their dreams for the future. The key was finding these topics and showing authentic interest in learning more. One of my most successful students was a young woman named Helen, who struggled with networking events because she felt she had nothing interesting to contribute. I taught her to approach these gatherings as research expeditions where her goal was to discover fascinating things about other people rather than to prove her own worth. Helen learned to ask questions like, "What's the most interesting project you're working on right now? And what got you interested in this field originally? And what trends are you seeing that excite you most?" These questions consistently led to engaging conversations because they invited people to share their expertise and passion. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, Helen had become one of the most sought-after people at industry events. Not because she had become more impressive, but because she had developed the ability to make everyone else feel impressive. People began introducing her to their colleagues, inviting her to exclusive events, and seeking her out for advice all because she had mastered the art of speaking in terms of others' interests. I learned that speaking their language isn't about adopting their vocabulary or pretending to share their hobbies. It's about recognizing what matters most to them and approaching those topics with genuine respect and curiosity. When you can help someone think more clearly about something they care deeply about, you become incredibly valuable to them. This principle extends far beyond professional networking. In marriages, friendships, and family relationships, the ability to engage authentically with what matters most to the other person creates bonds that withstand any challenge. When people feel that you truly understand and appreciate what's important to them, they naturally want to spend more time with you. The difference between flattery and genuine appreciation became painfully clear to me during one of the most embarrassing moments of my early career. I was trying to build a relationship with a potential business partner, and in my eagerness to impress him, I complimented his expensive suit, his impressive office, and his obvious success. His response was cold and dismissive, and I left the meeting knowing I had failed miserably. Later, I learned that this man was regularly bombarded with empty compliments from people who wanted something from him. My generic praise had actually worked against me because it demonstrated that I hadn't taken the time to notice anything genuinely unique or valuable about him as a person. This failure led me to develop what I came to call my appreciation journal, a small notebook where I recorded genuine qualities I noticed in people I met. Not their possessions or obvious achievements, but the character traits, skills, and efforts that revealed who they truly were beneath the surface. I began training myself to look for what was authentically praiseworthy in everyone I encountered. This wasn't about finding things to flatter them with. It was about developing my ability to see the good in people and express that recognition in ways that felt genuine and specific. The breakthrough came when I met a hotel clerk who was dealing with an extremely difficult customer. While the guest berated him loudly, the clerk remained calm, professional, and genuinely helpful. After the angry customer left, I approached the clerk and said, "I've been in customer service myself, and I know how challenging that situation was. The way you maintained your professionalism and kept looking for ways to help him was really impressive." The transformation in his face was immediate. This wasn't empty flattery about his appearance or generic praise about doing his job. This was specific recognition of a character quality he had demonstrated under pressure. He stood a little taller, smiled genuinely, and thanked me with obvious sincerity. I realized that sincere appreciation works because it acknowledges something the person has chosen to do or become. When you notice someone's patience, their attention to detail, their kindness to others, or their persistence in the face of challenges, you're recognizing their character in action. This kind of appreciation feels entirely different from compliments about things they have no control over. I taught my students to develop what I called appreciation eyes, the ability to spot genuine qualities worth recognizing in everyone they met. This might be a server's memory for details, a colleague's creative problem-solving, a neighbor's dedication to their garden, or a stranger's patience with their children. The key was making the appreciation specific and behavioral. Instead of saying, "You're so smart," I learned to say, "The way you broke down that complex problem into manageable steps really helped me understand it." Instead of "You're a great manager," I would say, "I noticed how you made sure everyone had a chance to contribute their ideas in the meeting." What amazed me was how this practice affected my own perspective on people. When you're actively looking for genuine qualities to appreciate in others, you start seeing the good in everyone. The annoying colleague becomes someone who pays careful attention to details. The overly talkative neighbor becomes someone who has genuine enthusiasm for life. This shift in how I saw people transformed not just my relationships, but my entire outlook on humanity. I discovered that everyone has something genuinely admirable about them if you take the time to look for it. The practice of sincere appreciation became a way of training myself to see the best in people, rather than focusing on their flaws or shortcomings. The most profound impact came when I realized that giving sincere appreciation felt as good as receiving it. When you genuinely recognize something valuable in another person and express it thoughtfully, you experience a deep sense of connection and positivity. This isn't manipulation or technique, it's human beings acknowledging the good they see in each other. I watched this principle transform marriages, business relationships, and family dynamics. When people feel genuinely appreciated for who they are and what they contribute, they naturally want to live up to that positive recognition. Sincere appreciation doesn't just make people feel good, actually brings out their best qualities. I learned one of my most valuable lessons about handling disagreements from a humbling defeat in what should have been a simple discussion about teaching methods. I was absolutely certain I was right, armed with facts and logic, ready to prove my point to a colleague who held a different view. By the end of our heated exchange, I had won the argument completely and lost a friendship permanently. As I reflected on what had happened, I realized that my colleague hadn't disagreed with my facts. He had simply felt attacked, dismissed, and made to look foolish in front of others. Even though I was technically correct, my approach had been so focused on being right that I had completely ignored his need to maintain his dignity and self-respect. This painful experience taught me that there's a crucial difference between winning an argument and winning people over. When you force someone to admit they're wrong, especially in front of others, you may gain intellectual victory, but you lose something far more valuable: their willingness to listen to you in the future. I began developing what I called my diplomatic shield, a set of principles for handling disagreements in ways that preserved relationships while still addressing important differences. The foundation of this approach was understanding that people's opinions are tied to their ego, their identity, and their sense of competence. When you attack their ideas directly, they experience it as a personal assault. The first technique I mastered was avoiding the words, "You're wrong," in any form. Instead of saying, "That's not right," I learned to say, "I have a different perspective on that." Instead of "You don't understand," I would say, "I may not be explaining this clearly." This subtle shift in language allowed me to present alternative viewpoints without making the other person defensive. I discovered the power of finding common ground before exploring differences. Even in heated disagreements, there are usually some points where both parties can agree. By starting with these areas of agreement, I could establish a collaborative tone that made it easier to discuss the more contentious issues. One of my most effective techniques became what I called respectful curiosity. Instead of immediately countering someone's position, I would ask genuine questions to understand their reasoning. That's an interesting perspective. What led you to that conclusion? Or help me understand your thinking on this. This approach often revealed that our disagreement was based on different information or different priorities rather than fundamental opposition. I learned to acknowledge the validity of others' concerns even when I disagreed with their solutions. I can absolutely understand why you'd be concerned about that became one of my most powerful phrases for diffusing tension while maintaining my own position. This acknowledgement didn't mean I was agreeing with their conclusion, but it showed respect for their underlying concerns. The breakthrough came when I realized that most people aren't really looking for someone to prove them wrong. They're looking for someone to understand their position and take their concerns seriously. When you can demonstrate that you truly understand why they hold their view, they become much more open to considering alternative perspectives. I developed a technique I called diplomatic disagreement. I respect your position on this, and I can see why you'd reach that conclusion based on your experience. I've had some different experiences that led me to a different view. Would you be interested in hearing about those? This approach honored their perspective while creating space for mine. What surprised me most was how this approach affected difficult business negotiations and family conflicts. When people felt heard and respected, even in disagreement, they were far more willing to find creative solutions that worked for everyone. The goal shifted from winning to problem solving, from proving superiority to finding mutually beneficial outcomes. I discovered that you can disagree with someone's ideas while still maintaining respect for them as a person. In fact, when you handle disagreements skillfully, you often strengthen relationships because people appreciate feeling respected even when you don't see eye to eye. The most profound change was in how I approached my own need to be right. I realized that being right wasn't nearly as important as being effective, and being effective meant preserving relationships while still advocating for important principles. This shift transformed me from someone who won arguments but lost influence into someone who could guide people toward better decisions, while keeping their friendship and respect. Asterisk, the most transformative insight of my entire career came through observing a waiter named Giuseppe at a small Italian restaurant in New York. What made Giuseppe extraordinary wasn't his efficiency or his knowledge of the menu. It was how he made every customer feel like the most important person in the restaurant. Watched him greet a businessman with genuine interest in his day, remember the preferences of regular customers, and treat a young couple on their first date with the same attention he gave to the restaurant's wealthiest patrons. Giuseppe had somehow learned to see the inherent dignity in every person he served, and his genuine respect for their importance was unmistakable. This observation led me to develop what I considered the master key to all human relations, the principle of making others feel important, not through empty flattery or artificial enthusiasm, but through genuine recognition of their worth as human beings. I began carrying with me a mental image of placing an invisible crown on the head of every person I met. This wasn't about pretending they were royalty, was about remembering that every individual has inherent dignity, unique experiences, and valuable perspectives that deserve respect and attention. The practice started with small gestures that acknowledged people's importance. When speaking with a receptionist, I would make eye contact and thank them by name for their help. When meeting with a janitor, I would ask about their family or comment on the quality of their work. These weren't calculated moves to gain favor, they were expressions of genuine respect for their contributions and humanity. I discovered that most people go through their days feeling invisible and unimportant. They're treated as functions rather than as individuals, the cashier, the secretary, the delivery person. When you take a moment to acknowledge them as a unique human being with thoughts, feelings, and experiences, you give them something precious that they rarely receive. The technique extended far beyond service interactions. In business meetings, I learned to acknowledge others' contributions before presenting my own ideas. John, your point about customer retention really made me think differently about this problem. In social situations, I would find ways to highlight others' expertise. Sarah has incredible experience with international marketing. She would be the perfect person to ask about that. What amazed me was how this approach affected people's behavior around me. When individuals felt important and valued in my presence, they naturally became more confident, more creative, and more willing to contribute their best efforts. It was as if recognizing their importance actually brought out their finest qualities. I taught my students to look for opportunities to make others feel significant in every interaction. This might mean asking the hotel clerk about their recommendation for local restaurants, thanking the parking attendant for keeping the lot safe, or asking a colleague about their opinion on a project outside their usual responsibilities. The key was ensuring that this recognition felt authentic rather than manipulative. People can sense when you're trying to butter them up for some purpose, but when your acknowledgement comes from genuine appreciation for their role and contributions, it creates a powerful emotional connection. I learned that making others feel important doesn't require grand gestures or expensive gifts. Often, the most meaningful recognition comes through simple acts. Remembering someone's name after meeting them once, asking about something they mentioned in a previous conversation, or acknowledging their effort even when the results weren't perfect. The compound effect of consistently making others feel important transformed every area of my life. Students sought me out not just for my teaching expertise, but because they felt valued and respected in my presence. Business associates began including me in important decisions because they trusted that I would consider their perspectives fairly. What surprised me most was how this practice affected my own sense of importance. When you spend your time looking for ways to acknowledge others' worth, you stop obsessing about your own status and recognition. The anxiety that comes from constantly trying to prove your own importance disappears when your focus shifts to recognizing the importance of everyone around you. I realized that the person who makes others feel important becomes important to them in return. This isn't a technique or a strategy, it's simply what happens when human beings treat each other with the dignity and respect that everyone deserves. My battle with social anxiety began in childhood and continued well into my adult years, even after I had started teaching others about human relations. The irony wasn't lost on me here. I was supposedly an expert on social interaction, yet I still felt my heart race and my palms sweat before entering rooms full of strangers. The turning point came when I realized that my social anxiety was entirely focused on myself, on how I looked, what I would say, whether people would like me, and if I would embarrass myself. This self-obsession was not only making me miserable, but was also preventing me from connecting with others in any meaningful way. I developed what I called my confidence building blocks, a systematic approach to transforming social fear into social competence. The first block was understanding that confidence doesn't come from feeling fearless. It comes from developing competence through preparation and practice. Before any social gathering, I began preparing, not by rehearsing clever things to say about myself, but by researching the attendees and preparing thoughtful questions about their work, interests, and experiences. This preparation shifted my focus from what will I say about me to what can I learn about them. The second building block was redefining the purpose of social interactions. Instead of seeing them as tests where I might pass or fail, I began viewing them as opportunities to discover interesting things about other people. This shift eliminated much of the pressure because my success was no longer measured by how impressive I appeared, but by how much I could learn and appreciate about others. I practiced what I called social experiments in low-stakes situations. At the grocery store, I I would make genuine conversation with the cashier. At the bank, I would ask the teller about their day with real interest. These small interactions built my confidence gradually because they proved that most people respond positively to genuine attention and interest. The third building block was developing what I called conversation anchors, reliable topics, and questions that could help me navigate social situations confidently. These weren't scripts, but rather frameworks that allowed me to engage authentically with anyone I met. I learned to ask about people's work with genuine curiosity. What's the most interesting project you're working on right now? I discovered that questions about growth and change were universally engaging. What changes are you seeing in your industry? I found that most people loved sharing their expertise. What advice would you give someone just starting in your field? The most important building block was learning to manage my internal dialogue during social interactions. Instead of the constant self-monitoring that fueled my anxiety. Did that sound stupid? Do they think I'm boring? Should I say something else? I trained myself to focus entirely on the other person's responses and emotions. I developed a technique I called outward attention, where I would consciously notice details about the other person, their energy level, what seemed to excite them, what they were passionate about. This external focus automatically reduced my self-consciousness, because I couldn't simultaneously worry about my performance and pay genuine attention to someone else. Practice became my greatest ally in overcoming social anxiety. I joined speaking clubs, attended networking events, and deliberately put myself in social situations that stretched my comfort zone. Each positive interaction built evidence that contradicted my fears and expanded my sense of what was possible. I discovered that small successes compound dramatically. One genuine conversation led to increased confidence, which led to more natural interactions, which led to stronger relationships, which led to greater social ease. The positive spiral gained momentum with each success. What surprised me most was learning that many socially confident people had struggled with similar fears. The difference wasn't that they never felt nervous. It was that they had learned to act despite their nervousness and focus on others despite their self-consciousness. The breakthrough came when I realized that my social anxiety had been based on a fundamental misconception. I had believed that everyone was watching and judging my every move, when in reality, most people were too concerned with their own social performance to scrutinize mine carefully. By the time I had mastered these techniques, social situations had transformed from sources of dread into opportunities for discovery. I no longer approached gatherings wondering if people would like me. I approached them curious about what interesting things I might learn about the fascinating individuals I was about to meet. Years after I had begun teaching my principles of human relations, I witnessed something that perfectly illustrated the compound power of likability. At a business conference, I watched a young woman named Eleanor, who seemed to know everyone and whom everyone genuinely enjoyed being around. What fascinated me wasn't her immediate popularity, but how her network of relationships had created opportunities that seemed to appear effortlessly. During the 3-day event, I observed Eleanor connect to entrepreneurs who ended up forming a successful partnership. She introduced a job seeker to a company president who eventually hired him. She recommended a restaurant to a group of attendees who had such a wonderful experience that they invited her to join their business discussion the next day. None of these outcomes seemed calculated or manipulative. They were the natural result of being someone people genuinely liked and trusted. This observation led me to understand what I came to call the relationship web, the interconnected network of connections that grows when you consistently apply principles of genuine likability. Unlike superficial networking based on what you can get from people, this web grows organically because people actually enjoy your company and want to help you succeed. I began tracking my own relationship network and was amazed by what I discovered. Students I had taught years earlier were now recommending me for speaking engagements. Business associates were referring clients to me. Even casual acquaintances were mentioning my name when opportunities arose that might interest me. This wasn't happening because I had asked for these favors, but because I had developed a reputation as someone who genuinely cared about others. Success. The career benefits of this network effect proved extraordinary. Job opportunities came through relationships rather than applications. Business partnerships formed through introductions from mutual friends. Speaking engagements multiplied as satisfied clients recommended me to their colleagues. Most importantly, when challenges arose, I had a network of people who were genuinely willing to help because they knew I would do the same for them. I discovered that likable people become what I called relationship hubs, individuals whom others naturally turn to when they need to connect with someone else. When people trust your judgment and know you care about others' welfare, they begin asking, "Do you know anyone who could help with this? Or who would you recommend for that?" This hub status created what economists might call relationship capital, a valuable asset that could be drawn upon during difficult times, and that increased in value the more it was used wisely. Unlike financial capital, relationship capital grows when you invest it in helping others succeed. I taught my students to think long-term about their relationship building. Every genuine connection they made was like planting a seed that might grow into something valuable years later. The shy student who struggled with presentations might become a successful executive who remembers your encouragement. The struggling entrepreneur you helped might later become an important client or partner. The key insight was that this network effect only works when your relationships are built on genuine care for others rather than calculated self. People can sense the difference between someone who sees them as potential resources and someone who values them as individuals. The former creates shallow connections that disappear when they're no longer useful. The latter creates lasting relationships that strengthen over time. I learned that becoming known as someone who makes others feel valued and important creates a powerful personal brand. People begin describing you as someone you really should meet, or one of the nicest people I know, or someone who really cares about helping others succeed. This reputation becomes one of your most valuable professional and personal assets. The compound effect accelerates because likable people tend to know other likable people. When you're genuinely pleasant to be around, you get invited to gatherings where you meet others who share similar values. These connections often prove to be the highest quality relationships because they're based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. What amazed me most was how this network effect created opportunities I never could have imagined or planned for. A casual conversation at a dinner party led to a consulting opportunity. A chance meeting at a conference resulted in a long-term business partnership. An introduction from a former student opened doors to international speaking engagements. The most profound realization was that the network effect of likability isn't just about professional advancement. It creates a richer, more fulfilling life overall. When you're surrounded by people who genuinely care about your welfare and success, challenges become more manageable and victories become more meaningful because you have a community to share them with. Asterisk, asterisk, though I lived in an era before computers and social media, the principles I discovered about human nature remain as relevant today as they were when I first taught them. In fact, I believe they may be even more important now, when so much human interaction happens through screens and digital interfaces that can easily strip away that warmth and authenticity that create genuine connections. The challenge of digital communication is that it removes many of the subtle cues that help us connect with others' facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and the immediate feedback that guides natural conversation. Yet the fundamental human needs I identified to feel heard, appreciated, and important remain exactly the same whether someone is sitting across from you or communicating through a device. I envision how my 6 principles would translate to this digital world. Becoming genuinely interested in others becomes even more crucial when you're not physically present. In digital communications, this might mean taking time to read someone's profile or recent posts to understand their current interests and challenges before reaching out. It means asking thoughtful questions and waiting for genuine responses rather than rushing through superficial exchanges. The power of a smile, which I learned transforms both giver and receiver, translates to the warmth and positivity you bring to your digital communications. While people can't see your facial expression in a text message or email, they can certainly feel the emotional tone behind your words. A digitally warm person chooses words that convey genuine pleasure in connecting with others. Remembering names becomes even more important in digital spaces where people often feel like anonymous usernames or email addresses. Taking the time to use someone's actual name in digital communications and remembering personal details they've shared creates the same powerful sense of recognition and importance that it always has. The art of listening translates to what I would call digital attentiveness, truly reading and responding to what people have actually written, rather than skimming their messages and responding with generic replies. This means asking follow-up questions that show you've understood their concerns and taking time to respond thoughtfully rather than immediately. Speaking in terms of others' interests becomes particularly important in digital networking, where it's easy to broadcast your own agenda rather than engaging with what matters to your connections. The person who shares articles relevant to others' interests, who comments thoughtfully on their achievements, and who offers help with their stated challenges will stand out in a sea of self-promotion. Making others feel important translates beautifully to digital platforms where you can amplify others' voices, share their accomplishments, and publicly acknowledge their expertise. In a world where everyone is competing for attention online, the person who consistently helps others shine becomes incredibly valuable. I imagine that my principles would be particularly powerful for overcoming the loneliness and disconnection that many people experience despite being more connected than ever before. The problem isn't the technology, it's that people are using these powerful tools primarily to broadcast themselves rather than to genuinely connect with others. The person who approaches digital communication with genuine curiosity about others, who takes time to make authentic connections rather than just collecting contacts, and who uses technology to strengthen relationships rather than replace them, would stand out dramatically in today's environment. What excites me most about applying these timeless principles to modern technology is the potential reach and impact. The ability to connect with people across geographic boundaries, to maintain relationships over great distances, and to build communities around shared interests and values, represents an incredible opportunity for those who understand that the foundation of all influence is making others feel valued and important. The key would be remembering that behind every screen, every profile, and every digital interaction is a real human being with the same needs for recognition, understanding, and genuine connection that have driven human behavior throughout history. Asterisk. The most important lesson I learned about becoming genuinely likable is that it requires daily practice until these principles become as natural as breathing. Knowledge without application is worthless, and sporadic effort produces sporadic results. The transformation from someone who struggles socially to someone people naturally gravitate toward happens through consistent, deliberate practice of these principles in every interaction. I developed what I called my daily habit chain, a series of small specific actions that I committed to practicing every single day until they became automatic responses rather than conscious techniques. This wasn't about perfection. It was about progress through persistence. Each morning, I would set an intention to genuinely notice something positive about every person I encountered that day. This might be appreciating the barista's efficiency, acknowledging a colleague's creative thinking, or recognizing a stranger's patience in a difficult situation. This daily practice trained my mind to look for the good in people, rather than focusing on their flaws or shortcomings. I committed to using people's names at least twice in every conversation, not as a forced technique, but as a genuine sign of respect and attention. I practiced asking at least one thoughtful question in every interaction, focusing on understanding something about their experience, their interests, or their perspective. These small actions gradually became natural parts of how I communicated with others. The most challenging aspect was maintaining consistency during difficult days when I felt tired, stressed, or discouraged. I learned that these were precisely the times when practicing these principles mattered most. When you make the effort to be genuinely interested in others despite your own challenges, when you smile authentically even when you don't feel like it, when you listen carefully despite your own preoccupations, you build character as well as social skills. I tracked my progress through what I called relationship indicators, signs that my practice was creating real change. People began seeking me out at social gatherings. Colleagues started including me in important discussions. Former students reached out to share their successes and ask for advice. These weren't vanity metrics. They were evidence that I was becoming someone others genuinely wanted to connect with. The compound effect of daily practice became evident within months. Actions that initially required conscious effort became natural responses. Conversations that once felt awkward began flowing effortlessly. Relationships that had been superficial developed depth and meaning. The anxiety that had plagued me in social situations was replaced by genuine curiosity and enthusiasm for meeting new people. I learned to view setbacks not as failures but as learning opportunities. When a conversation went poorly or when someone responded negatively despite my best efforts, I would analyze what happened without self-criticism and adjust my approach accordingly. This mindset prevented discouragement and maintained my momentum during challenging periods. One of the most powerful practices was ending each day by reflecting on one meaningful connection I had made or one way I had helped someone feel valued and important. This reflection reinforced the positive impact of applying these principles and motivated me to continue improving. I discovered that consistency matters more than intensity. Daily practice of small actions creates more lasting change than sporadic efforts to be impressive or charming. The person who remembers to ask genuine questions every day, who consistently acknowledges others' contributions, and who regularly expresses sincere appreciation will develop stronger relationships than someone who occasionally delivers brilliant performances but lacks consistent warmth and interest in others. The transformation became self-reinforcing as positive responses from others encouraged continued practice. When people began responding to me with genuine warmth and openness, it became easier and more natural to apply these principles. Success bred success, creating an upward spiral of improving relationships and increasing confidence. What surprised me most was how this daily practice affected my overall happiness and sense of fulfillment. When you spend your days focused on appreciating others, helping them feel important, and building genuine connections, you experience a deep satisfaction that comes from contributing positively to other people's lives. The practice of becoming more likable had transformed not just my relationships, but my entire approach to living. As I reflect on my journey from that awkward farm boy who felt invisible to someone who spent his life teaching others the art of human connection, I'm struck by the ripple effect that learning to be genuinely likable has created. Like a stone thrown into still water, The principles I discovered have touched countless lives in ways I never could have imagined when I first stood on that makeshift podium in my father's barn. The true measure of these principles isn't found in the immediate benefits they bring to your own life, though those benefits are substantial, but in how they transform the lives of everyone you touch. When you make someone feel genuinely heard, appreciated, and important, you give them a gift that extends far beyond your interaction. They carry that feeling of worth into their other relationships, treating their family, friends, and colleagues with greater warmth and respect. I've watched students who mastered these principles become the kind of leaders, parents, and friends who lift others up rather than tear them down. They create environments where people feel safe to be vulnerable, encouraged to take risks, and confident in their own worth. This positive influence spreads like ripples across a pond, touching lives in ways that can never be fully measured or tracked. Your personal transformation into someone genuinely likable creates what I call a multiplication effect. Every person you help feel valued becomes more likely to value others. Every individual you listen to with complete attention becomes a better listener themselves. Every person you treat with genuine respect learns to respect others more deeply. This is how you change the world, not through grand gestures or public acclaim, but through daily acts of recognition, appreciation, and genuine interest in the people around you. When you consistently apply these principles, you become a source of light in a world that often feels dark and disconnected. The legacy you create through becoming genuinely likable extends far beyond your lifetime. The people you influence will remember how you made them feel, and they'll carry that positive energy into their relationships with their children, their students, their employees, and everyone they encounter. Your commitment to seeing and appreciating the good in others creates a legacy of human dignity that can last for generations. I encourage you to think of yourself not just as someone learning to be more likable, but as someone taking responsibility for making the world a more connected, compassionate place. Every time you choose to be genuinely interested in someone else's story, every time you smile with authentic warmth, every time you make someone feel important and valued, you're contributing to a better world. The principles I've shared with you aren't just techniques for social success. They're a way of living that honors the fundamental worth and dignity of every human being. When you master them, you become part of the solution to loneliness, disconnection, and the widespread feeling that people don't really matter. Your journey toward becoming genuinely likable starts with a simple decision, the decision to care more about others' happiness than about your own image, to be more interested in their stories than in telling your own, and to focus on what you can give to relationships rather than what you can get from them. This decision, made consistently over time, will transform not only how others see you, but how you see yourself and the world around you. You'll discover that the person who makes others feel important becomes important to them in return, that the person who listens with genuine interest becomes fascinating to others, and that the person who brings out the best in people attracts the best people into their life. The stone has been cast into the water. The ripples of your transformation are beginning to spread. Where they will reach and whose lives they will touch is entirely up to you.